This conference will now be recorded.
So yesterday we saw about the basic configuration and the initial setup that is needed for a configuration for the timesheet to get started. So we saw about a provisioning setting that needs to be enabled, and then there's a switch that needs to be enabled in the manage employee central settings. I mean, it's not needed to enable it, but once you enable it in the provisioning, the same has to be reflected on the manage employee central settings. Then we have enabled certain fields that are relevant for the timesheet on the manage business configuration. Then we have given a relevant permissions for various rules, and then we saw about how to configure. I mean, we have not configured it, but the utility where we configure the workflows, and then the email notification that is that we use in the timesheet configuration. And then we saw some of the objects that are needed and a thumb rule for the timesheet workflow to work. So these were the basic things that is needed to get initially started with the timesheet. So today we're going to start with the actual configuration, like what are the elements and how we're going to configure it one by one. And that's we're going to cover it today's session. So so there are certain things like we normally open this. Yeah. So there are certain elements in the timesheet, just like what we have in the time off. So we spoke about holiday calendars, right? So holiday calendar is one of the element. Work schedule is one of the element. Time profile is one of the element. Okay. So we have covered this in the part of previous time off sessions. So we know what is a holiday calendar and how do we configure it. What is a work schedule? How do we configure it, and time profile just specifically for the time off. But now we're going to start utilizing the time profile from time profile as well, because this serves as a major element to get started with. Then we have something called as a time recording profile. Then we have time recording admissibility. Then we have default compensation variant. So there's nothing to configure in this particular section. Just we need to select whether there are certain drop down values and how do we want to behave, what the output the time has generated, that you can configure in, and that you can enable in this part of section. And this specifically is a configurable element where you actually decide what type of restriction you wanted to have on the approved timesheets. Like, for example, if we wanted to make changes to already approved timesheet by the manager, and up to what extent you wanted to allow the employees to make the changes is what you can decide in this. Like, for example, since we everybody know employee central timesheet is a weekly timesheet, so whatever we're gonna configure it, it's actually based on the weekly timesheet. It's monthly is a limited kind of it's a limited right now in success factors, but normally the evaluations, the rules that happens, the configurations that happen is only for specifically for a week. Similarly, here also it's about weekly restriction. So how does this work is, if I say, let's say, I say 3 weeks, okay, 3 weeks amendments are allowed. That means I will be able to make the changes up to 3 weeks in the past if it is approved by the manager. Beyond 3 weeks, if I'm trying to make the changes to the timesheet which is already approved by manager, it will throw out an error saying that you are not allowed to make the changes. So that is what the time recording admissibility is. Now, going with the time profile, what does the time profile define as? It will define you which all attendances are eligible for an employee, and whether they are available via self-service or not. Also, it will define you what are the default attendances that is needed, default attendances or breaks if an import, or let's say you're using some application to, to record data, right? So these are the things we define here, and also we define the time account type balances. Time account types here. One is for flexi time and the other one is for compensatory off. So these are the elements that we define in the time profile section. Okay, so we decide what all attendances are applicable for the employee, whether they are applicable with employee self-service. If their employees, end user can use that type attendances to record the hours. We also define, let's say, we are working, we have the data, we are not actually going and recording manually in the system, but there's a biometric system, there's an RFID or certain kind of terminals where we are recording the data, right? And that data is coming through the import or to the integration, and through the integration, when the data comes into picture, system should identify what type of attendances it should map against. That what we defined it in the time profile. Similarly, we also define the breaks, and we also define here, let's say we have a requirement where we use overtime to redirect to the time off, so that it can be used as a compensatory of later point of time. That can be defined at the time profile level. Similarly, we also define something called as a flexi time. Now, what is a flexi time is, let's say I am supposed to work for 40 hours, and for first week I have worked, just giving you an example. This is just a broad perspective. I'm not talking about the configuration right now. Let's say this is a 40 hours which I have worked in the first week. So ideally, if I specifically look, there's 0 hours which I am falling short of. Okay, let's say in the week 2 I have worked for, let's say, 45 hours. Okay, so the year what system will do is, it's actually 5 hours, it's a 5 plus hours, which means this 5 hours are actually my plus hours. Okay, and this 5 hours can be used as a, let's say, for the week 3, because of some activities, and maybe I might have thought that I already have 5 hours, I can utilize those, so that's why I work only for 35 hours, which actually falls, when I'm technically seeing, it falls 5 hours short of my regular working time. Now, what this 5 hours can be compensated with the help of this 5 hours. So now I can compensate this, saying that I can utilize this 5 hours from the flexi time account, right? So this is what a flexi time is. This is what a flexi time is. Now, what is a compensatory office? Here, the compensatory off is generally works as a different way. Now, this is also technically looking at it, it's completely different, but on the functional perspective, it is one and the same thing. Here, you do not see the negative balance here, but you see the negative balance here because you're comparing it with the regular working hours. The compensatory off is nothing but just an overtime is getting converted to the time off. But here, only your short periods where you're falling short of anything, you're trying to compensate with the extra hours that you have worked in. Now we'll see one of the requirement where we are taking the extra hours into flexi time up to certain limit, and then later on we are directing it to the compensatory off. And what is a time recording profile is? This is the main time recording profile, and what kind of timesheet I wanted to use is what we define here in this element. Like for example, what type of timesheet, whether it is positive or negative, whether it is positive or negative, I define workflow also here, and I define the valuation period, like how my week should start with. So defines the week, whether it will start with Sunday or etc. Like anything else. If you wanted to start with Sunday, it will show you Sunday as your first day in the week, or if you wanted to show others day, that you can define it in the time recording profile. Plus, we also define the time valuations. Time valuations are nothing but the conditions, like if you're working on a Saturday, if you're working on a public holiday, if you're working extra overtime, what does overtime should happen? That what you define it in the time recording profile with the help of an object called as in time valuations. Plus, we also define something called as in rules. Now, these rules are similar to the take rules of your time off. So these are called as in validation rules also. So this is conceptually we're gonna talk about the various elements. Let's get started with the time profile. So in the time profile, we start defining the time types first. And what are those time types are? This is specifically timesheets, so the classification should be attendance. And let's get started. So one and the same thing, we have one utility page which is called as a manage data. So all the configurations are done on this particular page, and whatever we are configuring right now is actually your master data. Okay, now let's get started with the time type. Okay, so in order to configure something, we start from here. If you wanted to show the existing one, we check this one, right? So wherever you see this, right, the classification as absence, this is something, this time type is something related to the time off. And if you see the classification, it is something related to attendance, then this is called as an attendance time types. And how do we define it? Let's say we create a new time type. The moment we start creating the new time type, by default, it shows you absence here. The classification is important here. But since we are recording and since we are configuring for timesheet, we specifically select attendance. Now here, if you can see, we have absence, attendance, on call, break, and extra. So attendance is what we're gonna try out. So when the moment you add it, you see the all fields have gone away. That means these are not relevant to the attendances. So here we give a specific name. This name is actually the UI name, what the employees will see it on the front end. So let's say I'll say recording working hours. Say I'll define a timesheet here. Now, what is what? So we have two things. We have spoken about this in the beginnings, like saying that we define a workflow at this level also. So now, what is the difference between the workflow at the time type level and workflow at the time recording profile level? Now, this workflow, wherever you define it in the time recording profile, the second element, this is applicable for complete weekly sheet. Okay, and this, whatever you define it at the time type level, this is individual workflow. Now, how this works is, let's say, for example, we are in a company, and then we are off. Now, company is offering for us to take the training sessions for timesheet. Now, every day you have to utilize 2 hours or 1 hour out of your planned working time, keeping your work aside and then you're charging the time against the training job. Let's say you have an individual attendance called as an on job training. Okay, we call this as on job training as an attendance. Now every day you record against this particular attendance type. Now when you're talking about the individual attendance type, this might be something which might require additional attendances, additional approval apart from the weekly timesheet. Also, it might be cost incurred as well, right? So if you are getting trained in something, that means there's a cost involved from the third party system where you're getting trained for specific thing and the cost is being paid out by an employer. Now in that case you might need an additional approval when you're defining any attendances at that particular part. So that is where you define it on the individual workflow level. And when you start recording the hours against this particular attendances, you can send out an approval for this only attendance. Now, this is called as an individual attendance. Let's say how this works with the week overall workflow is I have recorded, let's say in a week, I have recorded 2 times on job training, and this has been sent for a manager and manager's manager approval. Okay, and this can be different workflows. You can have one single level approval, and you can have multiple levels of approvals here also. So, let's say this has gone for an approval. One one part of my attendance is approved, by second one is not approved yet. Will the system allow me to submit for the workflow for the complete sheet? No. It will await the approvals for the individual ones until and unless the two individual workflows are approved by the manager or the relevant stakeholders. It will not allow me to submit for the complete workflow. That's how the behavior of these workflows are. So that's the reason you see the workflow even here. Since it's a regular recording working hours, I'm not defining any workflow here. Units, we're going to take hours because the timesheets generally we deal with the hours only. And this is a country specific. If you wanted to enable it as a country specific, you can. Otherwise, you can keep it global, making it blank. But let's say if you have a specific country specific time type, you can define that country here. Now you give a normal external code. I'm giving this as, now this external code is important, and it is very important in the case of integration where you shouldn't be exceeding your 10 character codes. Why? Because if you exceed 10 character codes, there's a certain limitation in the interface where you cannot have above 10 character loads. It will cut down up to 10 characters, and you would have to have a additional mapping in the interface. So in order to avoid those kind of things, we do not exceed more than 10 character limit here. And this is nothing relevant. This was one which I have configured as a custom field, one of the POC. But normally in the other systems, when you look, you don't see this. So and this is a classic example like what I said yesterday, right? If you wanted to enable something as a custom field, you can enable it at their particular object level. So since this was the time type object, I have configured a custom field called as a cancellation workflow. And if you see the drop down values here, you will see exactly what you see it in the configuration, workflow configuration. That means I'm giving a reference to the foundation object called workflow, and that's the reason I see all the workflows available here. So that is how you can create a custom field at this level, and you wanted to do a configuration or make any changes to that, you can do it. This is what I have done for one of my POC. So I have created one of the recording one of the time type. Similarly, let's create some additional so that we have certain data can be created at that point of time. Okay, classification again is an attendance. Now we finished regular working hours. Let's call this out as training hours. Now specifically for this, let's say I will have a additional approval here, and let's see how it behaves on the front end. I'm keeping it as non-specific, non-country specific. And why I am specifically calling out this as an external code this way, because let's say while you guys start configuring in the system which is provided to you, please use your initial so that you can differentiate from others. And in case you guys feel anything, I have to look into it. That will be easy for me to refer and make the changes accordingly. So this is my initial. I'm just saving it. So we have created two types of attendances. Okay. Now, let's say I create another one with a classification as break, because we need a break, because it's a standard break has to be configured. And I would call this as an, since it's already a scheduled break, I'm going to map it with the break hours in the work schedule. So I call this as an unscheduled unpaid break. You can call it as your customer's requirement or whatever you wanted to call this out as, and keeping this as country nons global. And then, so here we have created two types of attendances, one type of break. Then let's create another type of an attendance, which we normally call as an on call. And we have created attendance on call break. So extra is nothing but this is specifically for the time tracking, which is a clock in and clock out. I'm not going to show it right now, it will create a confusion, so I'm keeping it side when we get started with the clock in and clock out. So you have anything in the in your mind about the attendances, I can configure it. Otherwise, I'll do one more thing, which is administrative work, which we wanted to configure it separately. So I'm just giving a random. Okay. So now we got we got away with the time types that is necessary for the time profile to get configured. Now let's say once we have created the time types, we start with another step called as a time profile creation. Now in the time profile, now this is common across, and for the this holds your time of data as well as your timesheet data. Now how this works is, first and the foremost thing that we need to decide is the time recording variant. Now, what is the recording variant is? Let's say the moment you start configuring, the moment you start enabling the timesheet, you will have to see what kind of timesheet you wanted to have it. Like, for example, if an employee has to use start and end time. So let's say if it's a recording variant is as start and end time, when you start recording you see this clock in clock out hours and the clock icon, right? So that is something called as an so if you see this start time and end time, then you are working with the clock time variant, and that you have to decide it at the first point of time, because that's the main point which derives your time profile or your time off or your attendance to be like. Let's say if you have this, then specifically when you create absences also, it will ask you for the start time and end time. That means, so if you see this, it specifically, it will check out. If you say it's not a full day, it will definitely ask you for the start time and an end time. It's a full day, then it will just check you whether you have to have it for a 1 day or a second or a 2 days. That's how, that means how it is relevant is, if you're using duration, then it won't ask you for the start time and end time. It will directly ask you the duration. So that's the reason why we decided the starting point of time, whether you wanted to have it as a duration or you wanted to have it as a clock time. Now, for our demo purpose, for our configuration, I'm using clock time because clock times will have the most of variants that will cover in the configuration side. So I'm using a clock time right now, and let's start assigning. Okay, I'll say time profile section 2. This is just for my purpose. Time profile L2. Status will be active here. So I'm keeping this as yes. I'll come to this point when we start configuring this section. But for now, I'm just keeping it yes here. Now we start assigning the time types. Now here are the time types which you wanted the employees to see them on the UI. That's what you can assign it here. And what are applicable for the employees, you can assign it here. So let's say we have training hours, we have administrative task, we have on call duty,
Lata, we lost your screen.
sorry, I think I'm still sharing, I don't know why, but let me share it again. Can you guys see my screen now?
Is it a problem with my side? No.
Yeah, Lata, we can see your screen.
Okay. Okay, so we start. So let's say, I think we have missed out one more point. Let me make sure. So we saw this attendant. We saw one of the case, right, called allowances. So we have not created yet any allowance. And how do we create this? Since we have seen the time types, whatever we have configured these time types, right? We have used time type as a configuration. But in order to specifically create allowances, we have something called as an allowance type. This is an object which is specifically referred for the attendances against allowances. Now here you don't have to select the classification since itself it's an object. Now I'll see this as an I'm just giving a random name, on job allowance, and you can give an extra external code here. Okay. So now the moment you add it, um, you can add here as well. Okay, and the other thing is we enable it. If you wanted to enable it in the self service, since we are using timesheet is generally recorded by the normal regular employees and the it's a self service, we always enable this as yes until unless you have anything specifically which has to be recorded by the supervisor or by the other administrators on behalf of them, then you don't enable it in the employee self service. Otherwise we normally enable it in the self service. And this favorite time type, I definitely understand that it's specifically applicable only for the time off. There's nothing with the different. There's nothing to be doing on the timesheet side. So let me give the external code. Hide account balance is nothing to be doing with the timesheet because we don't have any balances being maintained over here. So I give an external code. So here also enable it for the employee self-service. Sometimes in the some of the organizations I've seen that this on-job allowances are generally uh, allowed by the manager. The managers apply or charge the hours against on-job allowances for the employees. Otherwise, you can enable it. However, this goes for the approval. Their manager can decide whether they wanted to approve or make the changes to it. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. So here we are only making the time types available, which are of attendances. Now we also need absence. So I'm choosing one random just to show how it appears on the system. I'm taking one and making this as yes, enable in the self service, and time type is also yes because it's relevant. And this is seventh one. Now, since we have done this, we also have to enable certain things at this level now. Let's say we are making it global wise, so we have not attached any country, so we're making it global, so keeping it blank here as well. Now if you see, there are three different things which are very important here to maintain. One is the main attendance type, definitely needed. Main absence type, definitely needed. Main break type, definitely needed, and that has to be part of this particular section. So for the breaks, I choose schedule break. And what does it do is actually the mapping. Now, what is a mapping is, if you remember the first session, we choose applied planned button in the positive time recording. This one, right? When I specifically say this one, the moment I select applied planned button, system automatically records hours against the regular working hours as an attendance, and break hours are against the unpaid breaks, which are defined at the time profile level. And how does this mapping happen? How the system understands if I have to use the regular working hours the moment I choose this is because of the settings that we do here. So the attendances we use here is you can also have a separate attendance which you wanted to have, and absence. Let's say let me save this. Okay, so it says it asks you to assign the time accounts here. So that's the reason it's not asking. So I'll do it later when it comes to this point of section. Let me enable this for right now. So here what it says is, the moment I choose some applied plan button, system should map those hours against my recorded working hours, the default time type, and the break should be defined against the schedule unpaid break, which I have defined it on the time profile level. Now let's say if it's coming through the external third party system, right? From the external third party system, as in you're using a biometric system or other third party systems to record your attendances, and that data is coming back to the system with the help of integration. So how the system understands in that point of time is, you have specific field called as a default attendance type. So here, if it is blank, definitely system will pick up this one values, or you have to define it in the interface. But let's say if you wanted to call out, so normally I have seen in the business requirements is, when an employee is manually recording hours, they have a separate attendance type. But when it's coming through the separate third party system, they define it as a separate attendance altogether. You can call it out separately as a punch in punch out, or biometric attendance. You can call it out to keep it differentiated from what the manual recording hours are from the biometric system hours. So that way you can configure it. I'm not enabling right now. We'll see how the system looks in the when we're doing it manually. Okay, so you're done with the first part of the section, which is your time profile. Now, now let's say when you start adding this to the job information of an employee, will the timesheet get generated? No, we're not done. We are not done with the configuration yet to go and assign it on the timesheet. So go and assign it on the time profile. So other thing what we needed is the time recording profile. And how do we create this? Again, to the manage data, create new time recording profile. So when you start creating a time recording profile, you will have certain sections here available. And this is another object. Whenever you see this plus icon, right, how to identify, whenever you see this plus icon, that means it's another object altogether. You have to configure and then you have to assign it. That's how it is relevant to see. Okay. Now, the time recording profile, as I said, we define the valuation period, like how my timesheet should look like. So if you look at this timesheet, it starts with Sunday, it ends with Monday, it ends with Saturday. That means this has an evaluation period starting from Sunday and ending with Saturday, and that's what you define it at the time valuation period. So the time recording variant, since we have seen it in the time profile section, we have chose clock time. So here also we use clock time. So this has to be in common with the time profile that we have configured. And here you can choose what kind of attendance timesheet you wanted to record, whether it is a positive, negative, overtime, negative, or absences only. Now we have seen a difference. What is a positive time? So if you see, this is a positive time where we normally start with the zero recording hours. Okay, and we start with the zeroth hour. The recording will start from the zeroth hour. Like, even though it is a planned 40 hours, we still have to record this 40 hours plus the deviations and also submit the timesheet. Okay, so this is what a positive timesheet is. If it is a negative timesheet, it generally starts with the 41st hour. You don't need to record this 40 hours that you see it on the planned working time, because system takes care of it by the help of a job where it will submit the timesheet with the 40 hours. Let's say how it works. If I am recording only overtimes in the timesheet, then I don't need to record this 40 hours. Then I don't also need to submit this. What will happen is on Friday at the midnight, system will automatically submit this timesheet without any approvals. I mean, without any further associations to it. Like, similarly, overtime also. Overtime, specifically when you talk about an overtime timesheet, here also we don't need to record your 40 hours, but you will have to record your overtime. Specifically in the overtime, what happens is you will not have regular working hours as a drop down. You will have something called as just an overtime, and that overtime can be split accordingly as per the requirement. And how do you want to take that overtime? As if you wanted to go with the base hours, premium hours, and those premium hours, whether you wanted to bifurcate into further section, that's what you can do it using the overtime. And as I mentioned, only absences, there's nothing on the timesheet. Everything is blank out. You will not see the timesheet at all. At the back end in the system will understand. It will only record your absences. So when the timesheet is not generated for the only absence kind of timesheet, it will only record absence, and the timesheet gets submitted only with the absence data. There is no recorded hours, there is no planned hours. And this is specifically used for some of the executive levels where they do not have any hours or any timesheet to be maintained. So that's how we define the time recording profile. For our part of section, I'm going with the clock time positive because it will have a lot of variations and you can use all the kind of requirements into that section. The same thing also applicable for all the other time types. So that's the reason why I'm going with the positive timesheet. To define a workflow here, giving an external code here, say positive clock time recording profile and valuation period. How we define is just click on this. If anybody is doing for the first time, definitely they'll go undergo confusion here. Normally we go to the manage data and then select the time valuation period from here and do create it. Otherwise you can also create it right away on the screen to avoid confusion. And this is what you see. Since it's a weekly timesheet, you will see only 1 week. You will not have any further bifurcation. You cannot add anything more than that because this is a standard drop down. Okay. Now you can define whether how your week should start with, whether it is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Since it's, if you see this, I have chosen default as Sunday. That means it will start with Sunday and end with Saturday by default. Let's say if it is Monday or Tuesday, it will start with Tuesday and it ends with Monday, the next week's Monday. And then your evaluation generally starts from Monday to Tuesday of next week. So that's how the relevance of time valuation period is. So, and you define an external code if in case you need it. I'm not creating one because I'm choosing the default one here. Okay, and let's save it. This is the basic start which we needed to create an attendance timesheet. I'm not defining an evaluation right now here. Let's assign it to the employee right now. Okay, we'll add a new employee. Let me copy position here. I'm doing a backdated hiring right now. Let's do it from Jan 1st. And I always recommend to use the new employee in our case when you're doing the configuration so that the previous data is not impacting your current configuration, or you wanted to understand how the configuration is working. This would be better option for us to understand. Okay, let's since it's a backdated, get started with the January 1000. Gordon Ramsay. Filling in the standard ones. So at this point of time, when you assign the time profile, let's see, you can also define the propagation rules to it. Like let's say for the for the onboarding team. Yeah, so whatever you see here, right, the time recording variant that you have seen here is got automatically defaulted it, right? So this is called as in propagation rules that you define it on the on save rules or on change rules of AC. So you define it and assign it on the position level. That means based on the employee group or kind of data that you're entering, it has to default to certain levels, and this makes easy for the onboarding team also to understand what kind of data you want to populate against which employee set. Let's say in an organization you have salaried employees where the overtimes are not applicable, only normal attendances, which is a planned working time, is applicable. You can default it saying that it's a duration one, not being very complicated. Duration one, standard profile, which has a normal attendances and absences, and the time profile also, which should be a duration profile. A negative profile should be working because they're not going to have any overtime, and also they don't wanted to and there's no need for them to charge 40 hours also. System should automatically submit, so you can have those kind of time profile recorded here. But let's say if it's specifically hourly employees or production workers who has to record their hours, each and every hours that are working in the system or in the organization, that has to be recorded. You can have that default variation based on the employee type set. Whatever you see, the employment staff, employee class, this can be used as a parameters to default these values, and these are called as in propagation rules. At the start of the requirement, when you have with the client, you definitely discuss about these things: which time profile is applicable against which employees, is there a bifurcation to it. In the system you can have various sets of time profile. You can have positive clock time, positive negative clock time duration, depending upon the requirements. But let's say when it comes to the time off section for one single employee, like let's say if they have a requirement of this, let's say Lata has to record leaves in a duration for leave, but when it comes to timesheet she has to record it against start time and end time. This is not possible, guys. Definitely you have to make a point here. If an employee has to record hours using start time and end time, similarly he or she also has to record leaves using start time and end time. They cannot have two different variants for one single employee. It's always one variant, either clock time or duration for one single employee. This you have to make it clear at the start point of the requirement, because we have faced such kind of situations. People generally, until unless we don't tell the clients what is the system behavior, they will definitely not understand. So that's why we should make the point of this during the start of the project itself. So I'm choosing clock time variants. Now if you see, this is, I always said this is a major driving factor. The moment I choose clock time, system will automatically default all the relevant time profiles, time recording profiles, to the ones which is specifically the clock time profiles. Now let's say what we have created is, I'll select those, and here also I'll select the ones which we have created. This I'm not selecting it. Let's say we'll choose whatever we have it right now. Yeah. So it's a clock time work schedule that you see. Oh no, I think it's an hourly one. something clock time normal one. Yeah, so this is the correct one. So basically it is also in the variant of clock time variant. You see start time and end time defined. It's a day model, and you see the Saturday and Sunday is a non-working day here. It starts with 8 and ends with 5 p.m. in the evening, and you have defined, this is called as a static break, where it is 1 hour break and there are two breaks defined to it, right? One is at 10 o'clock to 10:15, 12:30 to 1:15. So these are the breaks which are defined already in the work schedule. And how this impacts and how this happens, what happens to the timesheet of this particular employee, we'll see it in the uh, once we assign it to the employee. So if you see this, this is a by default, it has taken as time off, but we'll configure and make the changes accordingly. Right now, the dynamic break configuration is blank here. I'm not assigning anything. Time recording admissibility, I've chosen already the standard ones which is available, but we'll go to the configuration when is. And what does this mean is, this employee, Gordon Ramsay, can make the changes to the approved timesheet up to 4 weeks. Beyond 4 weeks, he'll not be able to make the changes to the approved timesheet. And that's the reason why we have assigned it, because these are standard and major mandatory fields that we need to assign when we're assigning the timesheet elements. This is a custom field. Please ignore this. We don't need it. I'm not assigning anything right now for the time event type because we're not using the clock in clock out right now. Mm, let's see how the profile is created for this particular employee. Okay, now if you see this, the timesheet has got generated for this particular employee, and let's see how it works. Yeah. So if you see, just get reminded of whatever we have seen. It's a positive timesheet. That's the reason why you see the applied plan time here. You see submit because we have a workflow assigned to the time recording profile. Since we have used the time valuation period as default, which is starting with Sunday and ending with Saturday. That's the reason you see Sunday as your start date, Saturday as your end date. Since we have assigned a work schedule, which is specifically starting at 8 o'clock in the morning and 5 o'clock in the evening, with a planned break of breaks, two periods of break. One is 15 minutes break in the morning and 45 minutes break in the afternoon. So, and the day model, if you see, the Saturday and Sunday is a non-working day, and that's the reason you see the planned hours as 0. Remaining hours are with the, actually it is 9 hours, but the system, when takes the data, it deducts the breaks by default. So that's the reason you see here 8 hours. And you see the planned working time after deduction of breaks, which is 40 hours. So your breaks which got deducted are 5 hours. Out of your 45, 5 hours are your breaks, which is 1 hour per day. It is actually your 40 hours. The holiday calendar that you have defined in the section, employment section, is the holiday calendar which is relevant to the Germany. Okay, so I think we do not have anything. Let's add one holiday here. We have an holiday of 10th October. Let's see. So we already have an holiday here. So it shows 10th, 13th of October, and that's the reason you see planned hours as 0. So it's a public holiday which is defined at the calendar level. Now, if you see the planned hours also, since it's a holiday, you will not have this part of section in the planned working time because it's a 0 hours which is needed there. Now, when you compare with the previous timesheet, you have seen the different sections here. You saw summary, time valuations, right? Now let's get started with assigning the hours here. Okay. Since we have defined recording working hours as a default one at the time profile level, if you see this, the attendance type, recording hours and break are default ones. That's the reason you see the recorded hours, the hours which are supposed to be working, those are mapped against the recorded working hours. And the breaks that you see here is got mapped with the main break type that you have defined at the time profile level. And let's say what are the drop downs that we have seen and we have configured. So these are the configured drop down values at the time profile level. So these are the attendances that is applicable for this particular employee to charge against. Also, we have created one on call duty, and that's you see the separate section for it. And since it's a positive clock time, you will see the clock icon here. We also configured one allowances, on job allowances, and for allowances definitely will not see the start time and end time because it's just an hours, it's a duration only. The start time and end time is not applicable here. Since we have assigned only one absence, that you can see only one absence over here. And one more quick thing to show is, let's say we have separately enabled a training hours, right? So if you see the status here, this means there's an individual workflow assigned to this on job training hours. And when you start submitting it, it will submit for a workflow, individual workflow for this particular attendance. So that's how you will see. So even though if you have started recorded extra hours, now here, let's say I am recording 1 hour extra here. 18. right? So if you see this, the duration is 10 here. Even though I do something, system will not understand that this 1 hour has to be taken extra, and it will not show me as an overtime because I have not defined any valuation yet. I have not defined any conditions yet. So this is how it is recorded initially. Because I have not defined any valuation, system will not understand. So we should be defining and giving the input to the system that whatever I'm recording hours which is extra, which is falling out of the planned time, it should be recorded against the overtime. That is not defined yet in the system. That's the reason you see it is not bifurcated. It still shows you as 9. It also shows you as 9 recorded hours. Right, so that's how you generate the initial. This is a basic timesheet without any conditions, without any rules here. With that, I close the session for today. From tomorrow we'll get started with the time valuations, and we'll get started with the conditions to be applied on the time recording profile to see how the system is working according to the overtimes that are generated in the system. I recommend you to please practice the same thing on your demo system. And one more quick thing, Madhumita, I was not able to uh, log into the system with the credential that you have provided. I see the password might not be working. If you're able to provide me the password, that should be fine.
Sure, Lata. Probably I have changed it, but I don't remember. But I'll just check it and I'll provide you.
Sure, definitely. So I recommend you to just configure these kind of objects in your system, and tomorrow we can get started with the valuations, because from tomorrow's session it will be really important, because the conditions when we start defining is completely different from what we have seen for EC or other things. So I definitely recommend you to join on time and try practicing in the system to get really onto the real time scenarios. With that, I end the session for today. Have a great time. Have a great day ahead. Thank you for joining.
Sure. Thank you, Lata.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lata.
Thank you, Akash. Yeah, thank you, Akash. Have a great day.